I'm Tara, 28 female. I live in a cozy but cramped one-bedroom apartment in the city, a place I've painstakingly made my own with vibrant art and second-hand furniture. As a graphic designer, my life is a blend of creative chaos and digital precision, fueled by coffee and tight deadlines. My world felt complete with my fiancé, Liam, a journalist whose sharp intellect and warm heart made even the most stressful days feel manageable. Our life was simple, built on love, trust, and the shared dream of one day having a home with a small garden. But as I would soon discover, the foundations of my life were built on a lie, and a single question at my engagement party was about to bring the entire structure crashing down. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The air in my parents' sprawling suburban home was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive champagne. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings, a symphony of feigned delight and genuine celebration. It was my engagement party, a meticulously orchestrated event by my mother, Margaret, whose flair for interior design was on full display. Everything was perfect, from the string quartet in the corner to the caterers serving miniature everything. My father, Richard, a man whose courtroom presence had made him a formidable lawyer, moved through the crowd with an easy smile, while my older brother, Ethan, the golden child investment banker, charmed guests with tales of market conquests. I stood beside Liam, my hand in his, a new diamond ring sparkling on my finger. He squeezed my hand gently, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Happy?" he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I leaned into him, a genuine smile finally reaching my face. "Ecstatic," I murmured back, and I was. Liam was my rock, the person who saw me for who I was, not just as the artistic one in a family of high achievers. My family had always been complicated. My parents and Ethan operated on a different wavelength, one tuned to ambition, status, and wealth. I was the quiet, creative daughter who had chosen a path they deemed less impressive, a graphic designer. It was a respectable career, but in their world of finance and law, it might as well have been finger painting. They had always treated me with a sort of benign neglect. I wasn't neglected in the traditional sense. I was fed, clothed, and educated at the best schools. But emotionally, there was a chasm between us. Ethan could do no wrong. His successes were celebrated with lavish dinners. His failures were quietly absorbed and fixed by my father's connections. My achievements, like winning a national design award, were met with a polite, "That's nice, dear." The disparity was most evident in our living situations. Ethan lived in a sleek, modern condo downtown, a starter property my parents had helped him secure. I, on the other hand, had saved for years for the down payment on my small apartment. When I'd asked for help, my father had given me a lecture on financial independence, conveniently forgetting the substantial check he'd written for Ethan. "It builds character, Tara," he'd said, patting my shoulder. "You'll be stronger for it." Despite this, I loved them. They were my family. And tonight, they had thrown me a party that was nothing short of breathtaking. Maybe this was their way of showing they were proud of me, of my choice in Liam, a man who, while not wealthy, was respected and brilliant. My grandfather, Arthur, arrived late, making a grand entrance as he always did. At 85, he was still a force of nature. A retired real estate mogul, he had a presence that filled any room he entered. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the crowd before landing on me. A wide, genuine grin spread across his face. "There's my girl," he boomed, striding towards me, his hand outstretched. He pulled me into a hug that smelled of old books and peppermint. "You look beautiful, Tara, and this young man must be Liam." Liam, ever composed, shook his hand firmly. "It's an honor to finally meet you, sir. Tara speaks so highly of you." "All lies, I'm sure," Grandpa Arthur chuckled, his eyes twinkling. He was the one family member I felt truly connected to. When I was a child, he'd been the one to encourage my drawing, buying me my first set of professional colored pencils. He saw the world not just in terms of assets and liabilities, but in lines, shapes, and beauty. He held me at arm's length, his smile softening. So, you're finally settling down, it's about time. I was beginning to think you'd never leave that shoebox apartment of yours. He winked, then his expression turned thoughtful. He looked around the manicured garden, at the guests sipping champagne on the patio. It's a nice place your parents have, but nothing compares to the Salt Inn. The air does it. I laughed, confused. I suppose not, Grandpa. He grinned again, a mischievous glint in his eye. Enjoying the beach mansion I gave you. I froze, the laughter died in my throat. The sounds of the party, the music, the chatter seemed to fade into a dull roar. What mansion? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I must have misheard him. What are you talking about? Grandpa Arthur's smile faltered, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. The house in Seabrook, of course, the one I signed over to you on your 18th birthday. A little nest egg, a place for you to create. I always pictured you painting there, with the ocean as your muse. My heart began to pound against my ribs. Seabrook, a place I'd only heard about in hushed, almost mythical tones. A place my family visited without me. I shook my head, a dizzying sense of disbelief washing over me. I don't have a mansion, Grandpa. I was never allowed to live there. Mom and Dad said it was a family trust property, too expensive to maintain, and that it was going to be sold. The color drained from my grandfather's face. His gaze shifted, moving past me to where my parents and Ethan were standing in a tight, celebratory circle. His eyes narrowed. Richard, Margaret, Ethan, get over here. Now. His voice, though not loud, cut through the party's cheerful ambience like a razor. Heads turned. The string quartet faltered for a moment. My parents and brother, their smiles still plastered on their faces, turned towards us. But as they saw the thunderous expression on my grandfather's face and the stunned, pale look on mine, their own faces went pale. In that moment, as the sea of confused guests watched, I saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic in their eyes. And then, as my grandfather's accusation hung in the perfumed air, all hell broke loose. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My parents and Ethan approached us, their movements stiff and unnatural. The practiced smiles they wore for their guests had vanished, replaced by masks of brittle composure. My mother reached us first, placing a hand on my grandfather's arm. Arthur, please, she said, her voice a low, urgent hiss. Not here, we're in front of our guests. I don't give a damn about your guests, Margaret, my grandfather retorted, his voice trembling with a rage I had never witnessed before. He shook off her hand as if it were a spider. I want to know why my granddaughter, the rightful owner of the Seabrook property for the last 10 years, believes it's some untouchable family asset that's about to be sold. My father, Richard, stepped forward, attempting to project an aura of calm authority, the same one he used to disarm juries. Dad, you're mistaken. There's been a misunderstanding. Tara's name isn't on the deed. It's in the family trust, just as we told her. A misunderstanding? Arthur's laugh was a harsh, bitter sound. I am a retired real estate mogul, Richard, not a senile old fool. I drafted the paperwork myself. I had my own lawyer, a man you don't know and couldn't influence, oversee the transfer. The deed was put in a trust, yes, but one that Tara alone was the beneficiary of, to be controlled by her entirely upon her 25th birthday. She turned 28 3 months ago. So I'll ask again, why doesn't she know she owns a multi-million-dollar beach mansion? My head was spinning. A mansion. My mansion. For 10 years I had been struggling, counting every penny, taking on freelance work at all hours of the night to make rent, all while believing I had nothing but my own 2 hands to rely on. I looked at my parents, at my brother, and saw not the family I loved, but 3 strangers, their faces contorted by a shared, ugly secret. Ethan, ever the slick operator, tried a different tactic. He stepped towards me, his expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. Tara, listen. Grandpa is getting older. His memory, it isn't what it used to be. He's confused things. The insult was so blatant, so dismissive, that it momentarily shocked my grandfather into silence. But before I could even process the cruelty of Ethan's words, Liam stepped in front of me. a protective barrier between me and my family. "With all due respect, Mr. Collins," Liam said to my father, his voice calm but firm, "your father-in-law seems perfectly lucid. And what he's describing is not a simple memory lapse. He's talking about a legal document, a deed, something that can be verified." My father's eyes flashed with anger. "This is a private family matter, Liam. It does not concern you." "Tara is my fiancée," Liam countered, his tone hardening. "Anything that concerns her, especially something that sounds suspiciously like fraud, concerns me." The word hung in the air. Fraud. The guests, who had been trying to pretend they weren't listening, now fell into a complete, unnerving silence. The only sound was the faint, mournful melody of the abandoned cello. "My moth." Ur's composure finally shattered. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted between my father and my grandfather. "Arthur, you're creating a scene. You've ruined Tara's engagement party." "Ruined it?" my grandfather roared, his voice finally cracking with the full force of his fury. "You've been lying to this girl her entire adult life. You let her struggle, let her believe she was on her own, all while you were what? Using her house as your personal summer getaway?" His eyes narrowed on Ethan. "That's it, isn't it? Those weekend trips to the coast. The pictures you posted on social media of you and your friends on a yacht, with a beautiful house in the background. That was her house, wasn't it?" Ethan's face went from pale to a mottled, guilty red. He couldn't meet my gaze. It was all true. The casual mentions of the family beach house. The invitations that were never extended to me because I was always so busy with work. The condescending advice about my finances, the pitying looks when I talked about my dream of owning a small home. It was all a lie. They hadn't been protecting a family asset. They had been using my property, living a life of luxury at my expense, while lecturing me on the virtues of hard work. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was the depth of the betrayal. My entire life, I had felt like an outsider in my own family. I had internalized their narrative that I was less capable, less ambitious, less deserving. I had worked twice as hard to prove my worth, to achieve a fraction of the recognition they gave Ethan so freely. And now I knew why. They had to keep me down. They had to ensure I never felt powerful enough to question them, to dig into the family finances, to ask the right questions. My success was a threat to their secret. "How could you?" I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I looked at my mother, the woman who was supposed to protect me, at my father, the man who was supposed to be my moral compass, at my brother who was supposed to be my friend. All this time, you all knew. My father, seeing the situation spiraling out of his control, made one last, desperate attempt to shut it down. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and menacing. "We are not discussing this further. Arthur, you will leave, now, and we will deal with this later, in private." But my grandfather wasn't moving. He stood his ground, a pillar of righteous indignation. "There is no later, Richard. The lies stop tonight. You will not bully your way out of this. You've underestimated me and you've underestimated Tara. But that's the last time that will happen." He turned to me, his expression softening, his eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. "Don't you worry, my girl. We'll get to the bottom of this. And I promise you they will not get away with it." The party was over. The guests, sensing the irreparable fracture in the family, began to leave in a quiet, awkward procession, murmuring their excuses. My parents and brother stood frozen, their perfect world collapsing around them. And I stood with Liam and my grandfather, on the precipice of a battle I never knew I needed to fight, for a home I never knew I had. The beautiful facade of my family had been ripped away, and for the first time, I was seeing the ugly, rotten core beneath. The drive to Seabrook the next morning was silent and tense. My grandfather drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel of his old, impeccably maintained Cadillac, his jaw set in a grim line. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of the passing landscape, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of shock, anger, and a profound, aching sadness. Liam sat in the back, a quiet, solid presence, his hand occasionally resting on my shoulder in a gesture of support. We had left my parents' house the night before amidst the wreckage of the party. My mother was weeping, not out of remorse but out of humiliation. My father was silently seething, his face a mask of cold fury. Ethan had simply disappeared, slipping away when the accusations grew too heavy. My grandfather had taken one last look at them, a look of such utter contempt that it made me flinch, and had simply said, "We'll be in touch," through our lawyers. Now we were driving towards a piece of my life that had been stolen from me. As we drew closer to the coast, the air began to change, growing heavy with the scent of salt and sea. We turned off the main highway onto a smaller, winding road, flanked by dense pine trees. And then we saw it. The road opened up, and there, perched on a bluff overlooking the churning blue of the ocean, was the most beautiful house I had ever seen. It wasn't a mansion in the ostentatious, gaudy sense. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all clean lines, glass walls, and weathered cedar, designed to blend seamlessly with the rugged beauty of its surroundings. It was a house an architect wow. D-design, a house my grandfather would design. We pulled into a long, gravel driveway and stopped. For a moment, I just stared, unable to breathe. This was mine. This place of impossible beauty and tranquility belonged to me. "I designed it myself," my grandfather said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmother and I spent the best years of our lives here. When she passed, I couldn't bear to be here alone. But I couldn't bear to sell it either. It was meant for you, Tara, for your spirit. I knew you'd understand it." Tears streamed down my face as we got out of the car. It was more than a house. It was a legacy. A connection to the grandmother I barely remembered, and the grandfather I now realized was my only true ally. "How do we get in?" Liam asked gently. My grandfather pulled an old, ornate key from his pocket. "The locks haven't been changed. Your parents were arrogant. They never believed I would find out." The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. The heavy oak door swung open, and we stepped inside. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. The main living area was a vast, open space with a vaulted ceiling and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the ocean. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The furniture was modern and elegant, but it was clear the house wasn't being cared for. A thin layer of dust covered every surface, and a faint, musty smell hung in the air. But there were signs of recent occupation. A stack of magazines, including a financial journal Ethan subscribed to, was fanned out on a coffee table. An expensive-looking bottle of whiskey, nearly empty, sat on the wet bar. In the kitchen, a high-end espresso machine was plugged in and ready to go. They hadn't been treating this as a cherished family home. They'd been using it as a weekend party pad. As I wandered through the rooms, a cold fury began to replace my sadness. I walked into what was clearly the master suite. The bed was unmade, the sheets rumpled. A woman's designer scarf was draped over a chair. It wasn't my mother's style. My mind reeled. Had Ethan been bringing women here, to my house, to the bed my grandparents had shared? The violation felt profound. Liam, ever the journalist, started looking for evidence. "Tara, Grandpa," he called out from a small office just off the living room. "You need to see this." We walked in to find him standing in front of a large desk. The top drawer was locked. "Stand back," my grandfather said grimly. He went to the fireplace, retrieved a heavy iron poker, and with a single, sharp jab, splintered the wood around the lock. He pried the drawer open. Inside was a collection of documents. Liam began to sift through them, his brow furrowed in concentration. There were utility bills, property tax statements, and maintenance invoices. All of them were addressed to the Collins Family Trust. But they were being paid from a bank account I didn't recognize. "They set up a separate account to manage the property's expenses," Liam murmured, his eyes scanning a bank statement. "And it looks like they were renting it out." My blood ran cold. "What?" He held up a document. It was a short-term rental agreement. For 2 weeks in August, the house had been leased to a family for the exorbitant sum of $20,000. There were other agreements, too, for long weekends and holiday weeks, dating back several years. "They were making money off my house," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. They were lecturing me about financial responsibility while they were secretly landlords of my property. But it was the next discovery that truly broke me. Tucked at the bottom of the drawer was a thick folder. Inside were architectural plans. My father and Ethan had been consulting with a high-end developer. The plans were for a complete demolition of the existing house to be replaced by 3 smaller, sterile luxury condos. They weren't just using my house. They were planning to destroy it, to erase my grandfather's legacy and my inheritance, all for a profit. The document was dated just last month. The sale of the family trust property my parents had mentioned wasn't a lie, it was their endgame. They were planning to sell my land out from under me. I sank into the desk chair, the papers trembling in my hand. The betrayal was absolute, a gaping wound that I knew would never fully heal. They hadn't just stolen a house from me. They had stolen my past, my present, and my future. They had robbed me of my security, my identity, and my connection to my grandparents. My grandfather placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. His face was a thundercloud of rage. "They will not tear this house down," he said, his voice a low growl. "They will not take this from you. This is where we make our stand, Tara. This is where the Collins family learns what happens when they cross an architect and his granddaughter." Looking out at the endless NSC of the ocean through the dusty glass, I felt a new emotion stirring beneath the pain: determination. They had made me feel small and powerless my entire life, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had let me discover the truth. And now, standing in the house that was rightfully mine, I was no longer the quiet, artistic daughter. I was the owner of the mansion on the hill, and I was ready to fight for it. The next few days were a blur of caffeine, legal jargon, and righteous fury. The mansion, my mansion, became our war room. My grandfather, with the precision of an architect drawing up a blueprint, outlined our plan of attack. Liam, using his investigative journalist skills, became our chief researcher, digging into every corner of my family's financial lives. And I, fueled by a decade of suppressed resentment, became the keeper of the evidence, organizing the mountain of documents we had uncovered. Our first call was to Estelle, my grandfather's lawyer, the same one who had handled the original deed transfer. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 60s with a mind like a steel trap. When my grandfather explained the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Arthur," she finally said, her voice grim, "this is grand larceny on an epic scale. They didn't just hide the existence of the property, they've been committing tax fraud and wire fraud. By renting it out and not declaring the income under Tara's name, and by using the mail and internet to conduct this business, they've broken several federal laws." Her words were both terrifying and validating. This wasn't just a family squabble, it was a criminal enterprise. Estelle immediately filed for an injunction to prevent any sale or alteration of the property and began the process of formally dissolving the fraudulent trust my father had created. She requested a copy of the original trust document from my grandfather's records, the one that named me as the sole beneficiary. Meanwhile, Liam was on a deep dive. He used a public records database to pull up every property deed associated with my parents and brother. What he found was staggering. My father had used the fraudulent Collins family trust as collateral for a series of risky business loans. He had leveraged my asset to fund his own ventures, putting my inheritance at risk without my knowledge. Ethan, it turned out, was even more brazen. We found a record of a lien against the Seabrook property. He had used it to secure a personal loan for $250,000, which, judging by the timing and his social media posts, he had used to buy a speedboat. A speedboat he had docked at the marina down the hill from my house. He had been so arrogant, so certain he would never be caught, that he had parked his ill-gotten gains in plain sight. The rental income was the most insulting discovery. Over the past 5 years alone, they had pocketed over $300,000 in undeclared cash. Money that could have paid off my student loans, helped me start my own design firm, or simply allowed me to live without the constant, gnawing anxiety of financial insecurity. While I was watering down my soup to make it last an extra day, they were using my money to fund their lavish lifestyles. I spent hours poring over the bank statements from the secret account, my stomach twisting with every line item. There were charges for five-star restaurants, designer clothing boutiques, spa weekends, and greens fees at exclusive golf clubs. They had treated my inheritance like their personal slush fund. My mother, who had always preached the importance of frugality to me, had spent thousands of dollars at an antique shop in Seabrook, furnishing my house with items I would never have chosen, erasing any trace of my grandmother's taste. The violation felt intensely personal. She had not only occupied my space, but had tried to overwrite my history within it. As we compiled the evidence, a clear picture emerged. This wasn't a spontaneous act of greed, it was a calculated, long-term conspiracy. It began when I was 18, a naive teenager they knew they could easily manipulate. They had relied on my trust, my lack of financial acumen, and the emotional distance they had so carefully cultivated to keep me in the dark. One afternoon, while cleaning out the dusty office, I found something else. Tucked away in a box of old photo albums was a letter. It was from my grandmother, written to me shortly before she died. I had never seen it before. My hands trembled as I unfolded the brittle paper. My dearest Tara, the elegant script read. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. There is so much I wanted to teach you, so much I wanted to see you become. Never let anyone dim your artistic spark. It is a gift. Your grandfather and I have left you the house at Seabrook. It is more than just a building. It is a sanctuary. It is a place where creativity can flourish, where the sound of the ocean can wash away your worries. It is your anchor, my love. Use it to build a life of your own making, free from the pressures and expectations of others. Do not let your family's ambition overshadow your own quiet strength. You are stronger than you know. All my love, Grandma Elinor. I collapsed into a chair, sobbing. They had hidden this from me. They had stolen my grandmother's last words, her final gift of encouragement. This was the cruelest cut of all. They hadn't just wanted the house. They had wanted to sever my connection to the one person in the family, besides my grandfather, who had truly seen and valued me for who I was. That letter became my fuel. My grief hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about reclaiming my life, my history, and my grandmother's legacy. We now had a mountain of evidence. The original deed, the fraudulent trust documents, the bank statements, the rental agreements, the illegal lien, the condo development plans, and my grandmother's stolen letter. Estelle was confident we had an airtight case, not just to reclaim the property, but to sue them for damages, back rent, and emotional distress. We have them, Tara, my grandfather said, his eyes gleaming with a strategic light. Richard is a lawyer. He knows how bad this looks. He'll expect us to file a lawsuit to drag this through the courts for years. He'll try to bury us in paperwork to wear us down. So what do? I asked, looking up from the letter. We don't do what they expect, he replied, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. A lawsuit is a private battle. Their crimes deserve a public reckoning. Your father is a respected member of the community. Your mother chairs charity boards. Your brother has built a reputation as a financial genius. Their entire lives are built on a carefully constructed image of integrity and success. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We're not just going to take back the house. We're going to dismantle their reputation, piece by piece, in front of everyone they've ever tried to impress. It's time for the final toast. The plan my grandfather proposed was audacious, theatrical, and utterly terrifying. It was also brilliant. We weren't going to serve them with a lawsuit. We were going to serve them with the truth in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. Our chosen stage was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Literacy Foundation, a prestigious charity event that my mother had co-chaired for the past decade. It was the pinnacle of her social calendar, an evening where the city's elite gathered to flaunt their wealth and philanthropy. My parents and Ethan would be there, basking in the glow of their carefully crafted public personas. It was the perfect venue for our ambush. The first step was to secure our allies. My grandfather, despite being retired, still held considerable sway in the city's business and legal communities. He spent a week calling in old favors, meeting with trusted colleagues, and quietly laying the groundwork. He met with the senior partners at my father's law firm, not with accusations, but with grave concerns about Richard's handling of a sensitive family trust matter. He didn't show them all our cards, just enough to plant the seeds of doubt and to ensure that when the truth came out, they would be primed to distance themselves from my father as quickly as possible. Liam, in the meantime, took on a more delicate task. He reached out to a trusted editor at a national newspaper, a woman known for her tenacity and her dedication to exposing the misdeeds of the powerful. He pitched her the story, not as a messy family drama, but as a case study in elder financial abuse and real estate fraud. He gave her a sanitized version, enough to get her interested, and promised her an exclusive, complete with verifiable documents and on-the-record interviews that would break the morning after the charity gala. The story was embargoed, a ticking time bomb set to detonate on our command. My role was perhaps the most difficult. I had to create a package of our evidence, a neatly organized portfolio of deception. I scanned every fraudulent document, every incriminating bank statement, every rental agreement. I designed a simple, elegant presentation, letting the stark facts speak for themselves. At the front of each portfolio, I placed a high-quality copy of my grandmother's letter, her beautiful script a silent testament to the cruelty of what had been done. We made 10 copies, one for my father, one for my mother, one for Ethan, and 7 for the most influential people who would be in that ballroom, the senior partners of my father's firm, the board members of his bank, and my mother's closest friends on the charity committee. While we prepared for war, my family was attempting their own brand of damage control. I received a barrage of texts and voicemails. My mother's were tearful and manipulative, pleading with me to think of the family and not let your grandfather poison your mind. My father's were cold and threatening, warning me of the legal consequences of making defamatory accusations. Ethan tried to appeal to our shared history, reminding me of childhood memories, as if a few nostalgic anecdotes could erase a decade of calculated deceit. I didn't respond to any of them. My silence, I knew, was unnerving them far more than any angry outburst would have. They were used to a version of me that was pliable, eager to please, and quick to forgive. They didn't know how to handle this new, silent, resolute Tara. The day of the gala arrived. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I was a graphic designer, not a corporate raider. I was used to communicating through images and colors, not through public confrontations. Liam took my hands in his. "You can do this, Tara," he said, his voice steady. "They made you feel small so they could stay big. Tonight, you show them how tall you can stand." My grandfather, dressed in a sharp tuxedo that belied his age, gave me a determined nod. "Remember what they took from you, not just the house. They took your grandmother's words, they took your peace of mind, they took your trust. Tonight, you take back the power. Let them see the woman they underestimated." We had arranged for a courier service, a team of discreet professionals, to arrive at the hotel ballroom at precisely 9:00 p.m., just as my mother was scheduled to give her keynote speech. They would distribute the portfolios to our designated targets simultaneously. My grandfather, Liam, and I would be waiting in the hotel bar, ready for the fallout. We also hired a private security guard to be stationed near our table, just in case my father or brother became aggressive. As we drove to the hotel, I clutched a copy of the portfolio in my lap. This was it. There was no turning back. The anger that had been simmering for weeks now burned with a clear, bright flame. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. It was for the grandmother whose last wishes had been dishonored. It was for the young, struggling artist I had been, who deserved so much better. It was for the woman I was now, who refused to be a victim any longer. We were an alliance of the betrayed. my grandfather, my grandmother's memory, and me, and we were about to bring the house down. The hotel ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. From our vantage point in the dimly lit bar overlooking the main floor, we could see my family working the room. My mother, radiant in a sapphire blue dress, laughed with the mayor. My father, the picture of civic-minded success, clapped a fellow lawyer on the back. Ethan, handsome and confident, was charming a table of potential investors. They were in their element, completely unaware that their perfectly curated world was about to be shattered. At 8:55 p.m., I saw the team of couriers, dressed in crisp hotel staff uniforms, enter the ballroom. My heart hammered against my ribs. My grandfather placed a calming hand on my arm. "Deep breaths, Tara. The architect has laid the foundation. Now we watch the demolition." At precisely 9:00 p.m., my mother was introduced. She walked to the podium, a graceful, practiced smile on her face, and began her speech. As she spoke about the importance of nurturing and protecting the vulnerable, the couriers moved silently through the room. They placed the sleek, black portfolios in front of the designated recipients. We watched as my father's senior partner, a man named Mr. Abernathy, opened his. His jovial expression slowly froze, then melted into a look of disbelief, then thunderous rage. He looked across the room at my father, his eyes like chips of ice. My father, still smiling and nodding at my mother's speech, hadn't noticed yet. But then his other partner opened his portfolio, and then the bank president, and then my mother's best friend, the chairwoman of the charity board. A ripple of shock and confusion spread through the most powerful tables in the room. Whispers started, quiet at first, then growing into an insistent, shocked buzz. My father, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere, finally turned his attention away from the stage. He saw the portfolios. He saw the faces of his colleagues. His smile vanished. He snatched the portfolio from Mr. Abernathy's hands and his face went ashen. He frantically flipped through the pages, the deed with my name, the fraudulent trust, the bank statements, the condo plans. He looked up, his eyes wild, and scanned the room until he saw us, sitting in the bar above. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. On stage, my mother faltered. She could hear the murmuring, could see that she had lost the attention of her audience. She looked down at her friends at the front table and saw them staring at her, not with adoration, but with horror and disgust. Her friend, the chairwoman, slowly pushed her own portfolio towards my mother's empty seat at the table. My brother Ethan, seeing our father's panic, went to see what the commotion was about. He read a single page over a shoulder, and the color drained from his face. He looked like a cornered animal, his charm and arrogance evaporating into raw fear. The ballroom was descending into chaos. People were standing up, talking in hushed, urgent tones. The charity event had been completely derailed. My mother, her voice trembling, tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." But it was too late. Mr. Abernathy stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked directly to my father's table. We couldn't hear what he said, but his voice was low and venomous. My father recoiled as if struck. Then, Mr. Abernathy turned and walked out of the ballroom, followed swiftly by the other partners. The message was clear. My father was radioactive. His career, as he knew it, was over. The bank president and his board members were the next to leave, casting looks of utter contempt at my family. The socialites at my mother's table began hurrying their purses, shunning her with icy glares. Her perfect evening, her entire social standing, had crumbled into dust in a matter of minutes. My father, in a last, desperate act of defiance, started towards the bar. Our security guard immediately stepped forward, a large, impassive man who blocked the stairs. My father stopped, his chest heaving, and pointed a trembling finger at me. He screamed something, but his words were lost in the growing din of the ruined gala. We watched for a few more minutes as the last of their allies and friends abandoned them. My mother was now sitting at the head table, alone, weeping into her hands. Ethan was arguing with one of his investors, who was shaking his head and walking away. My father stood motionless, a man adrift in the wreckage of his own making. My grandfather took a sip of his whiskey. "It is done," he said softly. We stood up and walked away, not looking back. There were no shouts of triumph, no gloating, just a quiet, somber sense of finality. We had exposed them, not with screams and accusations, but with the cold, undeniable weight of the truth. We had given them a final toast, and the truth had been a bitter poison. The next morning, the whole world would know what they had done. The morning after the gala, Liam's exclusive story broke. It was on the front page of the newspaper's website, complete with scanned copies of the most damning documents. The headline was brutal: "Prominent lawyer and philanthropist accused of defrauding daughter in multi-million-dollar real estate scheme." The fallout was swift and catastrophic for my family. My father was fired from his law firm by the end of the day. The firm issued a public statement condemning his actions and announcing an internal investigation into any other trusts he may have mishandled. The State Bar Association launched its own investigation, and he was facing disbarment. The bank called in the loans he had secured using my property as collateral, forcing him into personal bankruptcy. My mother's social life was obliterated. She was asked to step down from the board of the Children's Literacy Foundation and was ostracized by the very people she had spent her life trying to impress. Their friends, who had once flocked to their lavish parties, now crossed the street to avoid them. They were forced to sell their house to cover their mounting legal debts, downsizing to a small, unassuming rental in a neighboring town. Ethan suffered a similar fate. His firm launched an internal ethics review, and when the illegal $250,000 lien came to light, he was fired. The SEC opened an investigation into his financial dealings, and he was facing serious charges. His speedboat was seized, and his downtown condo went into foreclosure. But my victory was not without its own complexities. Estelle, my lawyer, advised me that pressing criminal charges would be a long, draining, and public process. "You have everything you wanted, Tara," she told me gently. "You have the house, free and clear. You have a civil case for the back rent and damages that will leave them with nothing. You've exposed them. Sometimes that is justice enough." I thought about it long and hard. Dragging them through a criminal trial felt less like justice and more like vengeance. My primary goal was to reclaim what was mine and to ensure they could never harm anyone else again. They were already ruined, personally and professionally. I decided not to press criminal charges, but to pursue the civil suit with relentless determination. In the end, the court awarded me the house, officially and indisputably. They also awarded me a judgment for $500,000 in back rent, damages, and emotional distress, a sum I knew they would spend the rest of their lives trying to pay off. I spent the next year bringing the Seabrook mansion back to life. With Liam by my side, I cleared out the remnants of my family's occupation. We hired a team to deep clean the house, exorcising the ghosts of their betrayal. I carefully restored my grandmother's furniture, which had been stored in the attic, and filled the empty spaces with my own art. The house was no longer just a property, it was my home, a sanctuary, an anchor. I quit my job and started my own graphic design firm, working from a sun-drenched studio overlooking the ocean. The business thrived, fueled by the creative energy the house seemed to breathe into me. Liam and I were married on the lawn, with the sound of the waves crashing below. It was a small ceremony, attended only by my grandfather and our closest friends. A celebration not of vengeance, but of new beginnings. I never spoke to my parents or my brother again. I heard through the grapevine that they had moved to a different state, hoping to escape the shame and start over. But I knew they would never truly escape what they had done. Their greed had cost them everything: their wealth, their reputation, and her daughter. Sometimes, as I sit on the deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I think about them. I don't feel anger anymore, just a quiet pity. They had been so consumed with the pursuit of wealth and status that they had lost sight of what truly mattered. They had a family, and they had squandered it. My grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years after our victory. He left everything he had to me, but his greatest gift was the one he had given me that fateful night at the engagement party. The truth. He had given me the strength to fight, to reclaim my life, and to build my own foundation, not on lies, but on the solid rock of integrity and self-respect. The mansion on the hill is no longer a symbol of betrayal. It is a testament to resilience. It is a place filled with light, laughter, and love. It is my legacy, inherited not just from the grandmother I barely knew, but from the battle I won for myself. It is the place where I finally, truly, came home.